Rive has just released the ability to create layouts responsively. And there's a lot of things that you need to kind of understand on how to create responsive Rive layouts, which is exactly what this tutorial is all about. Now, for those of you who are interested in really learning a lot about Rive, here coming up in 2025, I'm releasing a Rive for Web course. So definitely check out the YouTube description for that. Let's get started. All right, so let's get started here. I'm gonna get, well, let's start off with 1200 by 800 for the artboard size with our new Rive file, create artboard. And I'm gonna give it a background here of kind of darker. Let's go 0D, 0D, 0D if you wanna follow along. All right, so the first thing I wanna do is I wanna create 100% width and height layout or row wrapper that consumes this entire space, because the artboard itself won't have the ability to help us center our main element in the middle. So what we do is hit either Shift R or just select right here this element. So let's select that. I'm gonna lift, click, and drag out, and you'll see you kind of have like a two-column approach right here. And what we want to do though is for the row itself, you could see right there where it says row, we want to specify over here 0 on the top bounding and 0 on the left. So now it should be just kind of positioned over here to the left. Now if we switch back to the select tool, hit V on your keyboard, make sure you try to memorize keyboard shortcuts. It'll make your life a lot easier. And we drag this in. Just imagine this is the browser window because we're using this for web. You would want this thing in the middle, our element in the middle, to be fluid, and it's not. So we take row, and up here, we want to specify, instead of pixels, we want a percentage value. And I want this to be 100%. Same thing with the height, 100%. And there we go. So now when we move this in and out, it's going to, oopsie, make sure you have the artboard selected. There you go. You'll see that it is now responsive height-wise and width-wise. Okay, so now let's go ahead. I don't want a background color for our overall row. So I can just come over here and hide this under fills and strokes. And then I don't want a two-column approach right here for this particular container. So I'm going to delete one of the layout items in the hierarchy. There we go. Great. So now at this point, I want a lot more white space around this element. So I'm just going to reduce the width. And notice I can't get this centered. And that's because we have to take this row element right here in the hierarchy, and we can position this thing all over the place by selecting these icons. So I want it right centered smack dab in the middle. So now if we make some adjustments, you'll see that it will stay centered. Now if we go back to the artboard though and we reduce this, we can see that this element in the middle, this container, is not responsive. So we need to take the layout element right here in the hierarchy, and we need to click from pixels and change this to a percentage based value. Same thing over here, percentage based value. So now if I drag this in, there we go. That's kind of what we want. Now, a common web design pattern for dealing with layouts, especially if you're like trying to design for like a 4K monitor with the browser maximized, you might not want this to keep on growing, this center element, the overall container of your layout. In that case, we can fix that by selecting the layout itself and then coming up over here, and it says constraint, this little icon. We're going to click that and specify a maximum width. Now, we don't want a maximum width percentage value. I'd rather just change this to a pixel value, say like 1200. So now, when we expand this out, it's going to stay 1200 pixels because that's the maximum width. When we bring it in, it'll also stay, it'll keep on collapsing essentially based on the browser width. Okay, so let's go make some adjustments to the color of this layout. So I want a background, but not that dark. So we're gonna go way, almost just slightly lighter than the background of which it's sitting on. Now you might be wondering, why are there strokes over here? Well, that's because by default within Rive, it will outline any layout element with a stroke. I don't like that personally. You can use that actually for helping you visually see real quickly the scaffolding of your layouts. But if you want to turn that off, come up here where it says 100%, and then just turn off layouts right there. There we go. So now I also want some rounded corners. So under border, we'll bump this up to say, let's say 28. And now we have our nice little element that is centered here vertically and horizontally. Okay, so now within here, let's say we want to have two columns, 1 and 2, right? So over here, what we'll do with this layout selected is we're going to specify row. And I'm going to left click in there just once. So now we have a new element. Now notice how it changed layout to a row. So get used to, whenever you make changes to the structure and you define layouts, columns, and all that stuff, it may change your, I guess you could say, the mode of that layout. And so now we have this element, and what we want to do is specify a fill for that element. So we change this from a fixed type to fill. And notice it says width is 1 FR, or fractional unit. And if you're familiar with CSS, that should be a familiar unit to you. So it's sort of similar to, dealing with Flexbox. Now, what I want to do though is take this row that houses it, because we can't see it anymore because this layout is completely consuming it. So I want to add some padding. So what I'll do here is we switch to padding right here, and all I have to do is specify, and we can left click and just drag up, by the way, to change these values. So 34 there, 34 here. All right, so now if you hit V to switch to the select tool, select outside, you can now see this area. I don't like the color. I just want to go slightly darker, or lighter rather, than the background in which it's sitting on. So I'll specify color of like 212121 for the hex code. And then we'll also give it some rounded corners as well. Now remember, when you're, and this is a UI design thing, if you have rounded corners on the outer element, the rounded corners on the inner element should be smaller. So this one is a size 34. So, or wait, no, sorry. The corner is 28 right here. Let's go ahead and specify, let's just say, I don't know, 20. There we go. So now they scale in. I think we'll go even or less than that, 15. Okay. All right. This is quite a bit of amount of white space. So let's change this to like 25 and 25 for the padding. There we go. Sorry, I'm a designer. I like screwing around with that type of stuff. So now that we have that, we can actually duplicate this, Control D, and we have our two different columns. Now, there's no white space in the middle. So if we take the row, the parent element, we can specify the vertical or the horizontal gap between them. So if I left click and push this up, drag up 25 or so, that'll give us a nice separation between these elements. So now if we take the artboard and we pull in, yeah, there we go. It's working exactly as we envision it. Now, what if we wanted one of these columns to be larger or occupy more space width-wise? All right, well, to do that, we'll take this first one, and notice where it says for width, 1 fractional unit. If we change that to, say, 2, okay, there we go. So now we've created more of a disproportional layout. Now, what I want to do over here real quickly is I don't want a stroke, or a background rather. I want a stroke, so we're going to click plus, choose stroke, and we're just going to make this stroke. Let me go back there and select that. Alrighty. Okay, so now let's focus on this column essentially right here. And let's say we want to have 3 different elements stacked on top of each other. All right, so to do that, with this layout 2 selected, what I want is a column, and I'm going to left click once inside of it. Now, this is kind of opposite of the approach that I want, because I want it to span this way. All right, so what I'll do is expand this. We'll choose the layout right here that was just created. And for this element, we could choose fill. So now for the width, it's filling out the width entirely. For the height, I want a fixed height. All right, so we change this drop down to fixed. And now we can increase the height this way. Now we can take the layout container inside of here and add some padding around it. So we can adjust the padding here 18 and 18 for there. And then let's add some corner. We'll make this one 10. Let's make it 8 instead. There we go. And then get rid of the fill, add a stroke. And again, we're just going slightly lighter. There we go. So this is what you should have so far. And again, it's always a good idea when you're dealing with your structural layouts to move things around and make sure that you don't have anything that's a fixed position, that's overflowing its parent container and stuff like that. All right, I'm gonna make this slightly darker. Okay, so now let's say, for instance, we want to have some text inside of it. You might be encouraged, or you might have the idea of just taking the type tool or hitting T on your keyboard, left clicking, putting your type in and thinking it's going to be inside of this layout. It's not. This is actually not the ideal approach, because we could also do this and throw it in there, but then if we select this element, we're going to have a hard time trying to get this situated in here. So don't do that. What we would do instead is select the layout, and we have to wrap this here in a column. All right, so if I left click, we now have this little element inside of there, and we can take this, and now for the width of this element or the layout inside of it, what we can do is we actually don't even have to mess with this one, because really we want type in here, not like an element. So if I just come out here with the type tool rather, and I say AI safety board, just a fictional little title here. So now what we want to do though is we want to take this text and put it into this layout right here, which we can currently see because it has a background, which we'll remove. So let's take it and put it right inside of layout. I know it looks like garbage. Don't worry about that for a second. What we want to do is take our text layout, get rid of the background. So we just hit the little visibility eye icon. And now we can change this to fill for the width. Now, if we take row, we have access to the alignment options where we can just specify this right here. Now, it doesn't look like it's changing anything. So we can adjust that by taking text layout and going from fill to hug. Fill to hug on both the height and the width. So now we can see these changes more easily taking effect when we move this around. Okay, so now this looks bad. No white space on the left of this border or to the right of the border in between this text. So let's go ahead and add some padding. So padding right here, bump that up. All right, and then we'll leave that all the same. Take our text layout. I am a type snob, so let's take our type, our text layer, and make this bold. Okay, great. So now if we experiment, you can see it's behaving exactly as we would want it to. Okay, great. So next up, underneath this, let's say we wanted to have a paragraph. All right, so what we could do is we could just duplicate, Control D, and now notice, it's not behaving in the way we want. We want this not in two columns right here, one column, two column. We want it in two rows, one row, two rows. So we take the parent element and we'll transition this from row to column in this drop down right here. Okay, now when you make these type of changes, it may throw things off. So I'll delete this duplicate real quick and just work on this one. We're going to say for the width element, and again, notice it says fill, and it's still not working. Well, we could choose fixed and then just specify a percentage value of 100. There we go. So now if we duplicate this, it's going to show up underneath. We could take the overall container right here, and we can add a vertical gap right here by left clicking and dragging up. There we go. Now we can start to customize this. I don't want a fill or a background color on that one. So now it looks like this. And then we're going to take our type that's inside of it and modify that as well. So we'll take the text layer. We're going to make it regular. We'll make it smaller from 20 to, let's say, 15. All right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab some lorem ipsum text off screen and paste that in, and you're going to see some strange things happen. So if I select this and we choose the text run itself, we can come up here and paste that, so just like a paragraph of text in. So now notice by default, it's kind of just extending all the way outside of that element. And so if we take the overall text element that's wrapping around the text run itself, or rather the text layout, we can change this from the width from hug to fill. And then for height, we can change this, which is currently set to hug, to fill. Okay, so a little bit confusing. You have to tinker around with this stuff, and there's no replacement other than just getting in there, struggling, and trying to figuring out, how you deal with these things through repetition and practice. So let's take this element. I don't want the 18 pixels of padding, so we're going to say 0 right there. All right. Now, next up, I'm going to take just the very first row right here. And by the way, it's a really good idea, especially in Rive, to name your layers, because when it comes to dealing with multiple artboards and timelines that you're going to see here in a bit, it just makes dealing with the keyframing and animation a lot easier and more intuitive. So like, for instance, we'll just call this overall container. This one, we'll call this main layout. This one will change to left column. All right, this will be changed to header. This one will be changed to main content, or we'll just do content. There we go. Now let's go ahead and take header, duplicate that. We'll put it underneath the content layer, and then we'll also change this to footer. Okay. So now we can see right here, we have our column, and we have this row here, this row, and this row as well. And what I want to do is be able to fill out this container as much as possible. Now, if we want this to fill out the available space here, we take the content layer right here, and we are going to modify this so that the height is set to fill. All right. So now this is actually behaving, pretty good. Let's see how this works. Okay, move this up. All right. So now down here real quickly in the bottom, let's go ahead and take this. Let's rename this to footer. And what I'm going to do is really, we're not going to add anything inside of it. So I'm going to take the text layout, delete it, and maybe we'll just give this a fill. Something very subtle. You can barely even see it down there. Actually, I make that a little bit darker or more contrast, a little slightly lighter. I don't think I selected it. There we go. All right. Okay. So now, let's say we wanted to have like several buttons that are kind of stacked on top of each other. Again, we've already gone over what we would do. What we would specify here is specify column tool, and we'll just left click in there. Take our layout that's in the middle, this high contrast element, and we'll specify one thing I would do is take it and change it to fill to see if that gives you have that option. Sometimes, depending on the elements you're selecting, you may not have fill and these other options down here. So fill will work just fine for the width, and then height will do fixed, something like that. We'll go ahead and take the row, add a little bit of padding around it. So 12 on the top and bottom, right and left. And then we'll take this element, add some rounded corners. This time we'll go slightly darker. All right, switch to that tool. Take this, duplicate it. Now we're in that same situation now where they're opposite of what we want. So we change this to column, select these elements. I'm going to delete the one. And again, we'll do fill. And again, sometimes fill won't work. It's not filling the width of the available column. So in that case, I'll change this to fixed up here to a percentage value and specify 100%. So weird quirky type of things like that happen. Now we can duplicate it like 4 times and then add a vertical gap. Okay. Now let's take the artboard, adjust this. All right. So let's say you're happy with this. I know it's kind of like a strange layout. Now, let's say we wanted to be able to create a responsive version where these columns collapse, like this column here, this column right here, and they collapse and stack on top of each other, which is a common pattern for responsive design. Well, you might be enticed to like duplicate this artboard like you would in like Figma, and then just recreate it by changing this from where's the parent container. If we take main layout and we change this to column, you might be, that's what might make sense to you, but there's a different way to do it. And the way you do it here within Rive, oh, by the way, I'm such a type snob. Let me take this content, text layout. We'll make this, take our text rather, just a little bit darker, and then we'll increase line height rather right there. Okay, there we go. So what we do is we switch to the animate tab. So you can hit the tab button to switch and toggle between these 2 modes. And what we want to do is under here where it says timeline 1, we're going to change this to desktop. Just double click and rename that. And then we could duplicate it by right click, duplicate, or just click plus over here. And then we're going to change this one to mobile. Now, these are 2 different timelines. Any change you make based on whichever timeline you're set at, a keyframe will occur here. And so the first change that we want to make is under main layout, we want to change this from row to column. There we go. Now that's the only change we're going to make for now. We're going to have a few others. But now if we switch from mobile to desktop, we could see the 2 variations of the layout. Very, very cool. So one thing to understand is that when you make a change, or you see a keyframe here in mobile, we can see where it says main layout, there's a keyframe, and we can expand it. It says flex direction column. Well, we need to do the same thing in desktop. They're 2 different values, and they need to be able to know when to change between both of them. And the state machine will control that logic. So in desktop, what I would do is first I would hover over this. It's letting me know it is the main layout element selected. So if I have it already selected and I switch over to desktop, it's going to keep that selected. Now I have to manually come up over here, or over here rather, and click on this little keyframe icon. Nothing's going to change except it's going to add a keyframe here for flex direction row as opposed to flex direction column right here. Very important to understand this, otherwise you'll get really confused when things aren't working and responding as you anticipate. So we're going to make some more adjustments to this area, but for now, let's now switch to the state machine. State machine right here. So what we want to do is we're going to take entry, like when the app loads, and by default it already has it pushed to desktop. Now this little arrow in the middle is called a condition, and when you select it, this is a property inspector for that particular condition. Now when the app loads, we want a way to know and say, okay, what is the size of the width of the browser essentially, or the artboard right here. If it is beyond a certain pixel value, then we want it to go to desktop, maybe like 900 pixels or greater. Anything less than that, we want it to shoot to mobile. So we can drag this over here, create a connection, and then now we have a condition element for this. So let's specify the condition element for desktop. With that selected, we can come over here, click plus, and we can see artboard. Artboard width. You can also specify height and a ratio. If it is greater than or equal to, let's just say 900, it's going to go to desktop. Now this one, same thing, except we're going to change the operator from greater than or less than to less than, or greater than or equal to, sorry. So then less than 900. So watch what happens here. If we hit play, it's shooting to desktop because if we select the artboard, the width is 1235. It's not 900 or less. Now, if I change that to say 800, oh no, what happened? It didn't change. Well, that's because we have an entry. So if I hit pause, drag this in to a value underneath 900, then hit play, okay, this kind of works. Ignore this overflow issue. We're going to fix that. So now, in order to make it so that, let's say the person's browser, they manually resize their browser, and in order for it to switch back, we're going to use and create the same concept on the AnyState element. So what we do is take desktop, and we're just going to recreate that same exact approach. Now, there may be other ways of tackling this, but this is the way that I found works. And one of the Rive officials took a look at what I was doing and said, yeah, you could definitely do it this way. So this is how I'm setting it up. Now, with this condition here, we're going to do the same exact thing. We're coming over here, adding a condition, artboard width greater than or equal to 900. And then same thing over here. We're going to do artboard width is less than 900. So now watch this. We're going to click play. Now, because the artboard is currently 811 pixels, it's knowing that. So now we can just left click and drag this up. Look at that. Notice the state machine, how it's toggling back and forth between both of them. So what does this actually possibly look like then in the browser? All right, so this is the fun part. What we can do is hit export and just click export right there. Now, I already have HTML and CSS structure to import this Rive file. So take a look at the YouTube description or wherever you're watching this, and there's going to be a CodePen link where you can see all the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript necessary for getting this imported on a web page. So I'm just going to overwrite the existing Rive file, and now I'm going to show you through my document that's in Live Server what this looks like. So this is the browser. This is what this looks like, the thing that we just built. So let's drag it in. Oh no, sometimes there can be weird discrepancies like this, and that's because I obviously did not set a keyframe properly. So if we go back here and refresh, we can see by default it's already screwed up. So let's fix this height or this overflow issue. What we'll do is, the first thing we'll do is take left column here, and we're in the mobile timeline, by the way, and we're going to change this from fill to hug. Now, that's not going to appear to fix the problem right now, but remember, when we make a change in mobile, we want to change in desktop as well. So we're going to add a keyframe there as well. So notice they both have keyframes respectively. Now, the second part to fixing this little type issue is if we take the content element, you can notice that we have a base size right here. If we left click, now here's the thing, it would make sense to put hug, but for some reason it is not hugging the actual type. And we could try to do that as well in the text element, change this to hug. Okay, so now it's like extra large, but if we try to change this value, it's going to go back to fixed up here, which is not what we want, unfortunately. So if I back up a few times, and let me adjust this, delete this content element here. What we can do is this base size, we can just left click and drag this up to like 130 or so, and then go back to desktop and add a keyframe right there as well. So now if we hit play, now we still have these issues down here. Just go over here and hit play rather, and we adjust the artboard width. We can now see we fixed that issue. Now we have an overflow issue down here with these 4 elements. So going back to mobile, if we take these 4 elements and simply change to fill, now it's going to fill those out. And you could add a constraint if you wish, like a minimum, maximum height on those elements if you want. But now we can see there's a fill applied to those. Let's go back to desktop and add a keyframe for those as well. Remember, you want these all to match up essentially. So let's go ahead. I'm going to hit export, update the Rive file, and here we are. So here is the final result. All right, everybody, hopefully you enjoyed that. I know I did, and there's a lot more to learn, and there's a lot more things Rive is going to be capable of doing in the future. And so I'm personally excited. 2025, I think, is going to be a big year for Rive, and especially for integrating Rive for web and doing some really crazy ideas. All right, so as always, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.